welcome to my second video. So the first video I explained that I wanted to share my ELO collection to a wider audience. I started off with a video that was meant to be a simple ranking of favourite LPs from worst to best. That was 46 minutes long. One or two of you may have sat through that, perhaps others didn't. But the second video I'm going to try and keep a bit shorter. So I'm going to break my collection up and show it one video at a time. So this first one is going to focus on early ELO, the Harvest years. So Harvest being the record label ELO, and their related band of artists were signed to. So people like Roy Wood, The Move, Roy's other projects like Wizard, they were all signed to the same record label. So I have many of these records, both albums and singles, in my collection. So I'm going to have a look at those now. So the first one I want to show you by way of introduction is this little LP, which I don't think many of you, particularly in the USA, will probably ever seen before. It's called the Harvest Bag, and what this actually is a sample album of artists signed to that particular record label. And it was common practice back then for record labels to issue a sample album to show the audience and record buying public what they had to offer. So the idea is you might buy this cheap because it was a budget priced LP, and you'd have a listen to it and you might decide you like what you hear and some of the artists involved, and you go out and buy the proper studio albums. So it was to get the message out. And the reason I got this and put it in my collection is because, as you can probably see towards the bottom of the LP, it includes tracks by both The Move and Electric Light Orchestra, amongst other people such as Barclay James Harvest and Roy Harper and others. And also, just for the record, this particular record label was the home to Deep Purple and Pink Floyd for most of their career. And it was owned by EMI, and the idea was that EMI would put their more progressive rock artists and quirky folk rock and other sort of acts that you might put in that category and put them on the same Harvest record label. So ELO started off their career signed to this record label. The Move ended their career signed to this record label, and Roy Wood also did a lot of his early solo stuff on the same record label. So we're going to have a look at all those related records right now. So as I said, that's a budget priced sampler LP. The other cool thing about this is that it's actually the first LP or record anywhere where you will find a piece of ELO music committed to vinyl. This LP was released in 1971, and it predates ELO's debut album by at least a couple of months. So the track that ELO chose to put on this LP was Queen of the Hours. You can see the track listing on the back there. Queen of the Hours is ELO's choice of record for this sampler LP, and The Move had Ellie James on here, which is off their debut last LP that came out the same year. So that's the reason I've got this in the collection. I think it's a fairly cool thing to have the very first piece of vinyl with a yellow piece of music on it. You probably can't see from the camera, but there's a little logo there on this briefcase that's in the photo image. That's the Harvest logo. Mirrors the official Harvest logo here. So this cover photo, black and white cover photo, that's basically a bit of an in-joke. It shows what sort of bowler-hatted minister, finance minister, showing the budget to the nation, something that in Britain happens every year in front of the TV cameras. So standing outside number 11 Downing Street. So it's a bit of a riff on that, presenting the budget to the public. In other words, the budget Harvest record deal. So there you go, that's that. Right, so let's crack on with the ELO stuff on the Harvest record label, or the original stuff. So this is the debut album, the Electric Light Orchestra. The studio albums, of course, I went through one by one in the ranking video, so I'm not going to dwell too much on the on what I like on the music and what I don't like, because I've already been over that, and some of the artwork I touched on as well. Well, I will open it out to show you what it actually looks like. So that's the inside of the gatefold sleeve. Gatefold sleeves were the favourite of a lot of rock artists back in the 70s. So you've got black and white photos, and they all purport to have some sort of representation of the individual album tracks on here, so loose connection to the tone of the piece of music that you're looking at. A photo of the principal band members down here and some credits, and on the back we've got a picture, a fisheye photo of Jeff, Roy and Bev in period costume. So that's the debut album. There was no liner for the album. There was no real liners for most of the Harvest stuff, to be honest with you. That didn't come around until later in the 70s. But what you get with this LP, if you might find an early copy, is a generic liner that advertises the LPs of all the other artists on that particular label. And you've also got on here a lyric sheet which came with a lot of copies of this LP. Nothing on the back, but all the lyrics typed out there. The LP label, traditional green and yellow. All the Harvest record labels are like this, most of them at any rate, until they started doing some custom ones. So most of the 70s ones will look like that. So I won't get all of the LPs out to show you the labels because they're always basically going to look like that. If you're going to buy this album, the British version of it anyway, and you don't have it in the collection at the moment, I've seen it on sale for 70, 80, even 90 pounds, you know, way over $100 converted. It's not really worth that, I don't think. I think a fairer price is somewhere between 35 and 50 pounds depending on the condition. It's not that rare. It did chart in the top 40, and EMI kept a lot of their albums in the shops for quite some years. You could usually get a copy somewhere. So most record fairs will have a couple of dealers that have got a copy. So just look around at the prices and do try and get one with the lyric sheet in it, and be ashamed to buy it at whatever price and find you haven't got a lyric sheet in there. Right, so moving on, ELO's second album, ELO 2, spaceship there flying through the space. Open this up, it's another gatefold. So you've got a nice artistic shot of an alien planet landscape with the yellow spaceship hovering above it, and you've got the band members there all in profile with the song lyrics and credits underneath. I mean, that's quite cool. It's a plain liner for the LP. There's nothing inside to show you as such. This is also fairly, that's the back cover, fairly easy to get hold of. Probably slightly rarer than the first one maybe. It scraped into the top 40 again. Price wise, I'd think probably around £30, something like that. And while I'm showing you this LP, I'm just going back to this one again. Very quick story about LP titles and album titles. So in the States, this one is called Electric Light Orchestra 2. In the States, this one's called No Answer. So ELO 2, No Answer. Why do you have the LPs called like that? Doesn't make sense. Well, the reason is because this one, when it came out, although it was on Harvest Records in the UK, it was on United Artists Records in the USA. And some record executive in the USA turned around to a secretary or somebody and said, can you ring the UK London office up and find out what this debut album is going to be called by ELO? I'm going to be out, so leave a note on my desk. So the secretary did that, rang up the office, couldn't get anybody to pick the phone up, no one at home, and simply wrote out the memo, ELO new album, no answer, implying that they couldn't get a response. Obviously didn't communicate verbally with the other person. When that person came back to the desk, picked up the memo, saw the note saying no answer, thought it was actually going to be the LP title, and the LP went to print as No Answer. And from that day onwards, all the copies of that album in the USA, whether it's on vinyl or CD, have got the title No Answer, and all it means is a mistake with a telephone message. That's basically all it is. And that's incredible, really, because that would never happen these days with mobile phone communications and emails. A mistake like that just wouldn't get through. But back then, day-to-day operation, whether it's in the music industry or TV industry or whatever, mistakes like that could happen, and that's the story why ELO's debut album in the USA is called No Answer. Okay, let's have a look at a few 7-inch singles. It's going to be harder, the CD's on the camera, so I might put an image up as well if possible. That's the debut one, 105 380 Ritual. from 1972. So this came out in the UK a few months after the debut album. There was a bit of a delay sorting out first single release, and it's just worth mentioning that by this point in ELO's career, Roy Wood, one of the founding members, had actually moved out of ELO and formed a separate band called Wizard on the same record label, and took a couple of the musicians that were in the ELO lineup at the time with him. So this came out in mid-summer 72, made the top 10, got on top of the pops and lots of TV promotion, etc. The next single ELO did, again 1972, late 1970, a follow-up, Roll Over Beethoven. It's a 4-minute edit of a longer song they recorded for the ELO 2 album, which we just looked at. The reason I'm showing 2 copies of this is because the same category number for both of them, but they've got different B-sides. So the first one that came out has a B-side called Manhattan Rumble, which is an album track from the debut LP. That was quickly withdrawn because it wasn't supposed to be the B-side apparently. The B-side was meant to be Queen of the Hours, which happens to be the same track that was used on the sampler LP we looked at earlier. So that's the regular one. That's the rarer one. It's worth a considerable amount more. Having said that, if you're looking for it, if you're a completist like me and you're looking to fill the gaps in a collection like this, you should be able to find it if you look hard enough. I found mine by going on eBay and looking for sellers that had got photographs of both sides of the record label in with the ad, and then I could tell when it was the rarer B-side, and sometimes the sellers aren't really aware of that, so you might get it at a reasonable price. Now, the last original single that ELO did for Harvest was Showdown, very well known number. This track's came out on lots of different compilations, got re-released over the years. The B-side's worth mentioning on this one. It's in Old England Town, and it's actually a short instrumental piece. There's a longer vocal version of this, again on ELO 2, but for a time this was a unique B-side until Showdown and the B-side track got put on a compilation later on. Okay, so that's ELO's original material of Harvest looked at. I did say I was going to look at the other artists as well. So we'll look at the Move now. And when we look at this LP, it's worth pointing out that when ELO were recording their debut album, it's the same core group of musicians that formed the Move at this point. This is the Move's 4th and final studio LP, and the only one they did for Harvest. So they were creating all this music in the studio and selecting which tracks were going to go on here, which tracks were going to go on the earlier ELO album, and maybe some stuff left over that Roy had written he would keep back for solo projects. So it's all a bit mix and match at this point in the early 70s, which is why ELO fans tend to sort of have a lot of these records in their collection. Looking at the artwork on this, it's a painting, as you can tell. Roy Wood was an accomplished artist as well as a terrific songwriter and musician, so he's painted this cover. The LP is called Message from the Country. You can see Bev, Roy and Jeff sketched there as silhouettes against the sky. Not quite sure what the artwork is meant to represent. It's obviously something that was in Roy's head at the time. Some loose connection to sending a message to the country, I guess. The back cover shows a photo of the 3 principal members of the band. There was a 4th band member called Rick Price, which did a lot of work with the Move, and Rick stayed with Roy for a lot of Roy's 70s career, helping Roy to form Wizard later on. It's got a number of tracks on here by all 3 principal members of the band, so even Bev Bevan has a couple of tracks on here that involves him singing and writing. And the Message from the Country title track is by Jeff Lynne. That's pretty good. Ellie James is on here, which was the track the Move chose to put on that sampler LP. The Minister is another good one by Jeff. It Wasn't My Idea to Dance, and Until Your Mama's Gone, both by Roy Wood. Real good rockers, those numbers. And The Words of Aaron is another Jeff Lynne composition worth mentioning. So a good mix of stuff by both Roy and Jeff, and a little bit by Bev as well. Probably the Move's best album, even though it's the last one. They finally got it right on that final one. The tone of music on here is probably a bit heavier than ELO's debut album, which is more experimental. Okay, so that's the Move LP. There's a few singles as well. That LP came out in 1971. and there's a couple of singles the same year. Tonight by Roy Wood, top 20. Chinatown, again by Roy Wood, another top 20 hit. That B-side's worth mentioning. It's called Down on the Bay by Jeff Lynne. Really good track. I like that one. And the Moo's final original single for Harvest was called California Man. That came out in 1972. It's a 3-track single actually. It's got Do Ya on the B-side, written by Jeff. And of course Do Ya became more well known to ELO fans later on in the 70s when Jeff re-recorded it and put it on the New World Record LP. And it's also got Eddie James by Roy Wood on there. So that hit number 7 in the UK charts, and that was coming out of the charts about the same time during 1972 when ELO's debut single was going up the charts. Okay, so that's the Move singles. So what else we got left to look at? So I've mentioned Wizzard a couple of times. So this is the band that Roy formed when he left ELO. Took a couple of musicians with him, Bill Hunt and Hugh McDowell, and he formed the band with Rick Price's help. They put one LP out on the Harvest label called Wizard Brew, and again you can tell that's a painting cover. Roy's the artist again, and he's painted all the individual band members here in some form or another. The back, stylized writing on the back. There's 6 tracks on this LP, and it's a little bit like ELO 2 in the sense that they're all long tracks to fill the LP up. There aren't any obvious short pop songs or hits on this LP. We're going to have a look at some singles by Wizzard in a moment. Some of the titles of those songs you might be familiar with. They were very much of their time, pop, glam rock sort of songs, big chart hits. The LP is more of an indulgence. It's more rock and roll, slight jazzy influence. Fans that bought the LP after listening to the single releases probably a little bit shocked, but you know, the LP did reasonable. A lot of these are around. Going back to looking to fill your record collection gaps, you should be able to find copies of this on eBay relatively easy. There's no liner again for this LP, but there is a lyric sheet that comes with it. So much like ELO's debut album, there was a lyric sheet added to the LP. It's not as neat. That's Roy Wood's handwriting that's been scanned and printed onto the lyric sheet of the tracks in question. The other side's a bit more colourful. It shows the various band members of Wizzard. Quite a big band. They did a lot of live shows in the early 70s around the UK as well. So that's that. Of the early Harvest LPs, probably the Moo's Message from the Country is the most hard one to find. So let's have a look at some Wizzard 7-inch singles. First one up is called Ballpark Incident. That got to number 2 in the UK chart, which was really good considering this is the debut release of a new band. John Peel was a famous UK DJ on British radio, and he used to promote Roy Wood's music and Jeff Lynne's in the early days. So I imagine this probably got quite a lot of airplay. This fitted in nicely with the glam rock scene that was around at the time. And even more so was the follow-up, See My Baby Jive. This went one better and got to number 1. It's quite a well-known glam rock track from the early 70s. 1973, that one. The follow-up release to that, also in 1973, was called Angel Fingers. That also got to number 1. So at this point in Roy's career, Roy Wood's flying quite high with his new band, and outshining ELO to some extent. Those fortunes, of course, swapped over as the decade progressed. And the final Wizzard single release on the Harvest label is the famous I Wish It Could Be Christmas Every Day, which has become an annual festive favourite, and you hear that a lot on the radio around December time of year. And unusually had a picture sleeve, so I've managed to get a copy of the picture sleeve. That wasn't really prevalent amongst record labels in the early 70s to issue singles in picture sleeves. I know it was in Europe and Japan, but in the States to a lesser degree, and certainly in the UK, it was the mid to late 70s before we started seeing picture sleeves on most popular artists' record releases. Okay, so that's Wizzard. Now, Roy Wood also embarked on a solo career without the aid of any band members. So he produced and released his first solo LP on the Harvest record label in 1973. It's called Boulders. Again, Roy made himself responsible for the artwork, so that's a sort of self-portrait of Roy Wood. It's another gatefold release. What you've got here is a load of black and white photos showing you the progression of the making of the album. So you can see Roy doing a lot of the instrumentation himself, just emphasising the fact that it's a solo album. Back cover, Roy Wood with a cello, and no liner or lyric sheet with that particular one. The other thing worth mentioning about this is it's fairly easy to get hold of, but it's not easy to get hold of in good condition. And this is probably about the third copy I owned, where at last I've got a copy that's in reasonably good condition. This white cover, it stains very easily, and a lot of records like this are susceptible to damage. So yeah, I've been through a few records to try and get a decent copy of it. So Roy also released a number of singles on the Harvest record label under his own name. First one was 1972, called When Grandma Plays the Banjo. This was one of the few single releases that Roy Wood was responsible for that wasn't a big hit. It's from the forthcoming album Boulders, which we just looked at, and it didn't chart particularly well. It's a sort of countrified type of song, maybe not what the audience were looking for in the early 70s. As I said earlier with the Wizard singles, they were really used to sort of harmonies and glam rock, upbeat songs at the time. So that didn't chart very well, which makes it hard to find. So this is one of the harder Roy Wood singles to get hold of. Follow-up to that was 1973 and called Deary Lane. And that track has a funny genesis in the sense that when it was written, I don't think it was clear at the time that it's going to be a Roy Wood song. He wrote it, of course, but what I mean by that is that song featured with on ELO's live set in the early 70s. A number of those early concerts Roy actually sang this as part of the ELO repertoire at the time, but it didn't get selected for the album or any B-sides or anything, so it ended up being on Roy Wood's solo release. Follow-up from 1973, a song called Forever. That has a lot of Roy's harmonies on it. It's very Phil Spector-ish, reminiscent of American old-time rock and roll. Yeah, that charted. I think that got top 20, something like that. And then the last one that Roy released for the Harvest label is Going Down the Road, subtitled a Scottish reggae song. So I think he plays the bagpipes on this one. He was a multi-instrumentalist, so he could turn his hand to that sort of thing. And that was another modestly successful hit record. And that's it. That's all of the original releases by the ELO Roy Wood Move Wizard combinations on the Harvest label. So the next video I'll stick with this record label because there's lots of compilation releases and reissues throughout the 70s and 80s, some of which are quite hard to find and maybe you haven't seen them. So I'll do another video soon on that subject. In the meantime, take care. Thanks.